Hello and welcome to my kitchen. My name is Ridley and this is my kitchen. How I found it. So glad to have you here again. We're going to be continuing our journey through Italy. On our third stop, we're going to be taking a look at a fun dish that originated from the Veneto area of Italy, specifically from Venice. It is, and I'm going to get this wrong, but I'm going to try my hardest. It is Risotto di Nero al Seppia, which is kind of a rice of the sea with ink. And so we're going to use two ingredients that I've never tried before, so I'm a little excited but also have some palpitations. This is going to be fun. We're going to be starting off by making a little bit of a fish stock to cook everything in and to make the risotto with, because it's a really, really easy thing to make. And I actually wasn't able to find any at the supermarket that I was going to. So this is a great opportunity to just make a really quick and easy stock and then immediately use that stock in the dish. Now, the history of this particular dish is fun because, very similar to some of our other stops in this trip so far, the history comes from the using as much of an animal as possible. So in this case, it was fishermen who would bring in cuttlefish or squid, and then they would be using that and try and use as much of the animal as possible to make the dish. And that's how you come with this really cool usage of the ink from them as part of the ingredients. So to make this one, we're actually going to be starting, like I said, with a stock. And so the stock that we're going to be making is going to be almost kind of a base vegetable stock. I've got a lot of veggies on here that I've just chopped up really rough. You don't need to have any specific kind of shape to these. You can see I've got some carrot, I've got some garlic, we have some fresh parsley, I've got some fresh thyme on there. Now this right here is actually konbu. It's a type of kelp that's used oftentimes in Japanese cooking. You see there's a little bit of this kind of white powder on there. You do not need to rinse that off. It's actually going to be a great amount of umami and flavor, so keep that on there. We've got a couple of pieces of kombu. One of the more interesting ingredients in here is I actually used fennel bulb. So this is something that I've not really used a whole lot of, but it's got a very light aniseed sort of flavor to it. It almost looks like a mix between celery and onion, but flavor-wise very different. And then I also saw that you can add dried mushrooms to it. I am not a fan of dried mushrooms, but I do know that they have a good kick of umami and are very important for the earthiness of a broth. So I included a shiitake because. Now we're going to be mixing this with some seafood base in order to make a fish stock. In this case, I actually just have some pollock fish frames right here. Not a very particularly pleasant thing to look at. Now for these ones, I did fillet them myself. Not very well, and I didn't really film it. I've never done filleting before, and I would not use me as an example for how to get these together. But from everything that I've seen, you can actually go to a fish market or to your butcher and request their either discarded fish frames from when they've been making fillets, or they'll oftentimes have them available for stock. I've also run into sort of packets of seafood that you can use for a really quick seafood stew, but that little packet there you can throw in and make a fish stock out of that, or a seafood stock in that case. So if you're not able to find fish stock or seafood stock at your local supermarket, all you got to do is take these ingredients, throw them into a pot, and then simmer them for about 30 to 45 minutes, and that's going to give you just really, really great seafood flavor, and it allows you to use these extra pieces that you might not have used normally. Now, after we've made the stock, that's going to be the main sort of hydrator for the risotto. The risotto itself is going to be a rice-based dish, so of course we do have some rice here. Now, the rice in particular, you're going to want a high-starch rice, is what I was reading about. I saw several different varieties that they recommended. The particular one that I found, I believe, is called arborio, and it's a very traditional Italian-style rice and is used a lot in risotto, so that's the one we selected there. We're going to be doing a really quick base with some onions and garlic. That's going to be the aromatics. We've made a sofrito before when we've made some of our previous dishes in the ragu specifically. This one right here is going to be very similar to that, but instead of having pepper or celery added, it's just going to be onion and garlic. So a very simple mix of aromatics. A little bit of some olive oil to fry those off in. And then, of course, the ingredients that are brand new to me that I'm very excited about. So I have some squid here. Now you can use squid or cuttlefish for this recipe. I wasn't able to find squid in my supermarket, or I wasn't able to find cuttlefish in my supermarket, and so I did go for squid. They had some frozen fresh squid available, and then they had pre-cleaned. I went for pre-cleaned in this instance, again, because I am very not skilled with seafood. The last time I really had to deal with seafood was when I was camping more than a decade ago, and I had to fish to survive. And at no point does that teach you how you're supposed to properly handle it for the kitchen. So I have some pre-cleaned, prepped squid here. This is all the edible parts. We're just going to be slicing this up to use in the dish, so really, really easy to use for this one. And then we have the cuttlefish ink itself. You can get this in little packets. This one I got in a jar. It's available in a lot of specialty supermarkets. I got mine online. Very, very easy to source, but I have been told that it also stains a lot, so I picked a good light color shirt for today. And then we do have just a little bit of white wine that we're going to be using in the cooking process with the squid. And last but not least, a tiny bit of passata, which is just a very fine tomato puree, and some parsley for some seasoning, some flavor, and some garnish. So what we're going to be doing right now is we're going to be taking the stock, really quickly throwing those ingredients together to simmer that off, and then while that's simmering, because we'll have about 30-45 minutes, we're going to move over and prep the squid. So let's get the stock together. So we've got a stock pot right here. I'm going to add those fish frames in right to the bottom. And then it is just as simple as taking all of the prepared veggies and everything, adding these right over the top. And something I did forget to mention that was in here, but all of these leaves, this is not parsley, this is all from celery. So there's a little bit of celery in here as well. And also we want to add just a couple of bay leaves for a little bit of seasoning. I've also seen recommendations to add some star anise, but since I've got the fennel bulb in there, I'm going to use the fronds from that to give a lighter bit of the star anise flavor without going overboard on the actual spice itself. So we're going to take this. We're just going to cover up the ingredients with water. So there's no specific water amount here, and it's going to vary based off of the amount of fish bones and everything that you're using. In this case, I was using about 3.5 pounds. And I think this will be just about perfect for this particular pot. So I am going to do a little bit more, get it right up to the top here, and then get it onto a simmer. All right, so we have our stock heating up in the background. I've got it on medium heat right now. Once it comes up to a light simmer, I'm going to knock it down to about medium-low, just so that I don't have it going too hard. But while that is heating up, I can get started on the ingredients for our risotto itself. So we're going to start with that sofrito. And this is just going to be, like I said, a very simple mix of onion and garlic. Now, I have before used little chopping machines, and they're definitely very, very helpful for certain applications, and it really depends on the amount of chopping I'm doing. But you definitely don't need to have special equipment for any of these recipes. So this one I'm going to do quickly by hand. A couple of cloves of garlic need to be minced up, and then one medium-sized onion, which I was able to find a reasonably medium-sized onion this time. Absolutely. All right, so the way that I've always cut onions as far as getting uniform cuts out of it is I'll just do one right down the middle here, and that gives us two fairly equal halves. And then you're going to be slicing along the half lengthwise like this, and then on the side here closest to me, I actually don't complete the cut. So I go down, but I leave just a little bit of the onion intact here, and this gives a support structure along the entire onion to keep it in place while I'm cutting. Once you get a bit of an angle with your hand down, it becomes a lot easier because the curve of the blade is naturally just a little bit above on this end. And this way, when I turn it again, now I have these really nice strips that are all held together in one place. So I can do the same size cuts along this side, and it produces these really nice fairly uniform pieces. There's going to be a little bit larger sides as towards the edges just because of the curve of the onion, but really it's a really quick way to make really, really uniform, simple pieces for a dice or a mince. And then what I do for this last little bit here is, now that I've got it down to one size, I can just finish out this last little piece, cutting through that bit that I left intact, and now we have a really simple minced diced onion. So we're going to complete that with the other half right here. Once again, we're going to not go all the way through, just leave a little bit so that it can help us hold things together. I don't know how many times I've had to deal with these loose slices while I'm trying to get a dice going, and it's just not fun. So hopefully this will make things a little bit easier, and also shows that you definitely don't need any fancy extra equipment to make something like this. Although you do need cuttlefish ink, so pick your battles. For the garlic, it says that we want 1 to 2 cloves, which means 2 to 4 cloves. All right. Now, similarly, there are a lot of places that will sell pre-minced garlic. Something that I definitely want to note is that for garlic specifically, if you've ever tried raw garlic against the pre-minced, pre-prepared garlic, there's a major difference in the potency of the flavor. And sometimes that can have a really big effect, especially if you're going to be using the garlic in a situation where you're not going to be cooking it quite as much. That strong alum, I guess, bitterness is really missing from the pre-prepared garlic. In this particular instance, I probably could have used either, but I do like using fresh ingredients when I can, so that's where we're at with this. Okay, and then for the garlic itself, this you can similarly cut it into slices and then cut it crosswise. I am not going for any specific size on the garlic, so I'm just going to be cutting really thin slices, going back across it the other way with the knife, and doing a very fine mince. Probably not a very good one either, but it's enough. It doesn't have to be super perfect in this case. I just want to make sure that the flavor is enough to spread through everything and there's enough garlic to be present in it. All right, so then I have some garlic, I have some onion. Those are going to be the basis for the aromatics. And then I'm going to put these on a small little plate off to the side, and we're going to slice up some squid. We have our pre-chopped onions off to the side. Garlic, I've mixed the two together because they're going to be going in the pan at the same time, so there's no need for me to keep them separate along the way. For the squid, I've seen a couple of different ways to prepare it. So the first one is going to be actually just very simple. Come in here and we're going to be doing just very thin strips along the mantle here. And then with those strips, just like what we did with the onion, we're going to go back over them in the other direction, and it's just going to create some small little cubes of squid. Look, sometimes it's easier to move the cutting board than it is to move the things on the cutting board. So, one option is you can just leave it in strips like this. And so I've seen a lot of people, they will lay it out flat when they're cleaning it and then cut it into these long strips, maybe not quite as long as these, but you can cook it like this. I'm going to be going all the way to the cube form just because I think it's going to be a little easier to incorporate and a little bit easier for me to maneuver with. But just know that you can do the strips. I have seen it in a few recipes. And then the question is, It's got a really kind of, I don't want to say rubbery texture because that's a very bad thing when it comes to seafood, but it's springy, so I get why people say that. Definitely hopeful that this is going to be a little bit more tender when we actually get it done, and that's why our first step in this recipe is going to be to braise it for a little bit to help to soften and tenderize the meat a little bit. It's not something that I've seen kind of specifically required as part of a recipe before, but having cut into this already, the texture is inspiring me to want to tenderize it. So I see where we got here. It also has a weird kind of crunch when I go through it, which is probably because it's still partially frozen. All right, so there is our very messily cubed first half of squid. Let me make sure that everything is cut all the way through, because otherwise that's not going to be very pleasant. Now, similarly, there are also a lot of different ways that I've seen to make this a more visually striking aspect of the dish. So one of the very specific and much more skilled creators that I saw, who has clearly made this dish many, many times, they took a fresh squid, they cleaned everything right there, pulling the beak and everything out. They actually used the ink sac from the squid itself in the recipe. And the way that they had taken this is for the mantle, this big piece right here, they cut the smaller, thinner parts towards the bottom into these cubes, but then, here. So this part down towards the bottom, they cut that into the cubes, and the upper part, they did this interesting scoring technique that ended up creating a texture of the finished pieces that they used to garnish the dish at the end. So you can make this as fancy as you want. I am doing a much more basic and hopefully traditional approach, but there are a lot of different ways that this specifically can be made into an experience, I think. All right, can confirm, if you section out the squid first, it is a lot easier to control and get it into a much more consistent cubed dice, just like the vegetables. So I would recommend quartering the mantle like this, and then doing the strips, and then doing the cubes. It's definitely a couple extra steps getting it to the strips, but the strips that you end up with are a lot easier to manage. Beautiful. We have some cubed squid. All right. The only other thing that I think I'm going to want is I know that later on we are going to use a little bit of parsley as both garnish and, like I was saying, just a little bit of flavor. So I'm going to take a little sprig or two of parsley here and just cut up into some very small pieces. Now, normally I would be very worried about the cross-contamination on this, and this is definitely not parsley that I'm going to be using as a garnish because it has just touched the cutting board with the raw squid juice on it. However, this parsley is going to go in with the squid when we're braising it. So I've got this ready to go in with the squid. I'm going to go check on the stock, see how that's doing, and then we are going to be able to move over into the kitchen because that is all of the prep work that we need to do for this entire dish. Our stock is just about up to temperature, so I'm keeping an eye on this. As soon as I start to hear it or see it start to bubble a little bit more, I'm going to turn the temperature down just a touch. While that's going, I'm going to move right into our cuttlefish here, or our squid in this case. Now for this one, starting it off is really easy. I've got this on a low, medium, low heat. I'm going to add just a little bit of olive oil here and that sofrito that we made earlier. So this is just the onion and the garlic. And we're going to fry this for a few minutes to soften up. We don't want it necessarily to get super brown, so we're going to keep the temperature on that medium, medium-low. And this is probably going to be about 10 minutes. And yeah, let's keep it at about 3, just until we get a little bit of translucency in the onions and the garlic, and we've got a really great fragrance coming up from it. Beautiful. Okay, so we've got the stock simmering right here. I've added a timer for about 35 minutes up top. While we've got that going, you can see that the onions have really got this little bit of translucency down. We don't have any browning, a very slight yellowing to the color, but definitely softening them up. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take our squid that we prepared earlier. We're going to add this in with the sofrito that we fried up. And then we're just going to cook this for a little bit until the squid or cuttlefish starts to turn opaque. At that point, we're going to add a little bit of the white wine to it, and we're going to let that braise in that liquid for about 30 minutes, which is perfect because that's going to match up with the remaining time on our stock. So I'm going to get this mixed in, try and get it into a very nice single layer on the pan, kind of as much as I can, but nicely mixed with the sofrito. And then I'm going to let this cook out just a little bit until I start to see the color of it turn a little bit more opaque. We can clearly see that there has been a significant change in the color of the meat of the squid here. So it's kind of got this opaque white color to it now, almost indistinguishable from the onions that are in there. Now at this point, we're going to add a little bit of the dry white wine from earlier. And so this is just going to be enough to cover the cuttlefish / squid and the onions. So we're going to give this a little mix, settle it out so that everything is covered in that liquid. Because once again, braising, if you've never braised before, it's just cooking something in a liquid of some kind. In this case, it's going to be in that white wine. And it's going to really meld all the flavors of the onions, the garlic, a little bit of that dry white wine, and of course, the squid that we have in there. So we're going to let this cook for about 30 minutes, which is conveniently about how much time we have left on our stock. So these should finish fairly close to each other, and then once we've got the cuttlefish / squid braised, we're going to be adding the rice in and slowly creating the risotto using the stock that we made earlier. So let's give it a few minutes and we'll be on to the next step. Oh, actually, almost forgot. So remember, earlier we chopped up that parsley, so that's also going to be a great addition to this braise right here. So we're going to add a little bit of the fresh chopped parsley in with the wine, and also a couple tablespoons of the passata, which is that really fine tomato puree. And so this is just going to add some nice additional flavor on top of the white wine and the onions to give some more depth to this particular broth sauce base. There we go. Okay, so now we've got all the flavors in there. We're gonna let it simmer and braise for 30 minutes. We've had these simmering for about 40 minutes on this one right here. I've got the braising for the seafood going on in this pot over here, and it's just about done. But our stock, I think, is ready for us to strain it out. So we're going to pull it quickly off the heat here, turn the heat off, and then I'm just going to use a chinois strainer right here to strain out all of the bits and everything, and then I'm going straight back into the pot we were cooking it in, because we do not want this to cool off. When we actually get to the point where we're mixing the rice in, we want to make sure that the broth that we're using is at least warm. So I'm going to get this off instead of having it on 5, which is important. And then we are going to strain this out into here and have ourselves some broth. Now in this particular instance, I'm using the chinois strainer. It's going to get really fine particles out for us. But if you don't have one, feel free to use a regular colander or a regular strainer. I would just maybe put a paper towel or a coffee filter in the bottom, and that's going to help get those really fine particulates out. Same thing, at the very bottom, we're going to have some bits that will have a little bit more sediment in them just because it's been cooking with everything in here. I'm probably going to stop pouring before I get to that sedimented area, just so that I don't have that extra uncontrolled flavor bit at the bottom. We'll dump that out. Then I am going to really quickly take this pot that had everything in it for the stock, empty everything out of it, so that I can put the stock back into it and get it back on the burner on a low heat to keep the temperature up. All right, so we have our strained seafood stock here, or fish stock. I am going to give it just a little taste because I have never made a fish stock before. And that is very fascinating. It's really mild, so I can see why it was saying that you could use a vegetable stock instead. It doesn't have the punch that I usually get, or the saltiness that I get from beef or chicken stocks that I've made in the past, especially not store-bought ones. I do think it needs a little bit of salt, so I'm going to do a little touch-up on salt here. I didn't add any into the original recipe, so it was just been the vegetables. And we can give this a nice little stir, and then I think we're going to be ready to move on to actually building the risotto. I'm a little scared about this because everything that I have been reading, and I've never done a risotto before, but it is a slow addition process of the stock while allowing the rice to absorb that fluid while you're going through. So I've been told it's sort of a game of patience, and we should expect that to take about 15 to 20 minutes once we start combining these two together. In order to get to that position, we've got our stock ready here. We have been braising our squid over here in this nice little liquid. We are now going to add the cuttlefish ink, which, if you've never worked with this before, it's really, really thick. And I've been told will stain absolutely everything. It was originally used to actually write papers and things like that, or to actually use as writing ink. So it is very, very dark and very effective. Now for this one, I double-checked the measurements after missing some measurements on my last time cooking because I want to make sure that I've got this right. This is going to be between 1 and 2 tablespoons of ink for this. And it says that you want to use, if it comes in little packets, roughly 1 packet per serving. I'm not entirely sure how many servings this is. I think this is closer to 4 or 5 servings. So a packet is probably closer to a half of a tablespoon, maybe a little bit less. Now we're going to be mixing this together. It says get it all mixed in there until it forms a really nice kind of thick sauce. It said like a ragu, which is fun because we've made a ragu here when we were doing the bolognese. There's only so much I can pull out of this. It's very sticky. So I'm going to call that good on the ink that I've added in. I'm going to now mix it in as best as I can here. And it has become a really, really dark, thick liquid here, with a really mellow, earthy scent to it. When I was smelling the ink individually, it has an oceanic vibe to it, which is hard to describe because it's not salty or seawatery, but it smells like something that has come out of that environment. Yeah. So, get a little rinse on that. We've got this mixed together. It has definitely changed the color of this to a very vibrant, dark black color. And then we're going to add our rice in and give a really nice stir of that to get it all thoroughly incorporated into this ink mixture. Wow. Now, after this mix is all together, we're going to give it just a quick minute to absorb the liquid that's already in here. And then the process for combining the two is going to be adding 1 ladleful of the stock at a time to our risotto, stirring it while it's cooking and allowing it to absorb in all of that broth. But you wait until the broth that's in the pot or the pan has been absorbed before you add the next ladleful. So that's going to be our next little bit of process. I just want to make sure I've got the rice thoroughly mixed in with this ink mixture before I start the combination. That is so incredibly dark. All right, so we're now going to add a little bit of heat to this. We have the broth is maintaining its temperature over here. Add a little bit to the risotto. I'm going to give this a stir. And then I am just going to keep stirring and keep an eye on the rice and try and see when the liquid levels have dropped, because that's going to be my main cue to know that they've absorbed into the rice. After that, I'll just be slowly adding ladleful after ladleful. The estimate for this is going to be probably about 4 cups of broth overall, but the measurement on that is not as important as the texture. So I'm going to be trying to pay attention to that. I don't really know what texture I'm looking for, but I know that I want the rice to be fully cooked and that we're looking for it to get kind of creamy and a little bit smoother. That's why the high starch content in the rice is important. So we'll be doing this for the next 15-20 minutes or so and slowly adding more and more of this broth. And as we're doing so, we should see this turn from this a little bit kind of harder, chunkier, almost mixture to a creamy, smooth blend. This has been a very interesting process. So obviously, the rice has absorbed the liquid and grown in volume by a large amount. What I was trying to keep an eye on is while stirring, I could kind of see the bottom of the pot, and as long as there was liquid in that, I wouldn't add any more broth, because everything I was seeing is you don't want it to become soupy or soupy. And occasionally as I was kind of making these stirrings, I would see it dried instead, or it was starting to get dry on the bottom, and you don't want it to scorch on the bottom either. And so that's when I was deciding to add a little bit more, is right when I was seeing it start to transition before it really became a major issue. We ended up trying this at 15 minutes and then again at 20 minutes. In each time the first time it was flat out crunchy in the middle. The second time it just had a little bit too much graininess to it. And so now we're probably at 22-23 minutes because I talk too much. And I think this is about good. I'm not seeing any of the drying at the bottom, but it's also not super soupy. I've never done risotto before, so I hope that this is roughly the texture we're looking for. But that is the risotto. So I'm going to move it into some bowls. We're going to garnish it with a little bit more of that parsley, some fresh stuff that hasn't been touching squid juice. And I will see you guys over at the tasting menu. Hold on a second. I'll see you guys over at the tasting table, and we will go from there. I have no idea what to expect for this, even though I've tasted it along the way. We're gonna see. That'll work. Yeah. Oh, black in a black dish. Good contrast though, right? So if you did want to make this a more visually appealing dish, this is the time when you would take that textured pieces of the squid and you would have fried it separately, giving it a little bit of color, and you can garnish it with that. And that will give a really big contrast to the dark, dark color of everything here, because it wouldn't have been mixed in with the squid ink. So I definitely understand why that's used for aesthetic reasons. Traditionally, if you're just trying to use every part of an animal, I get it. But let's see if it stands up to my palate. I hope so, but we're gonna see. I think that hopefully, actually I have no necessary hope about this, but I do have a strong suspicion that most of the dishes in the future will not be the same color as my cookware. But
this is like a black sludge.
now I want to be full disclosure for you.
Uh-huh.
Please do not take this as indicative of a risotto. If you love it, great. I'm glad, but I don't know if this is what it's supposed to be like.
Okay.
So please just take it with a grain of salt, or if you need any more salt, there's some right here.
Gotcha. I don't think I've ever had a risotto, much less a seafood variant. So, here we go. You know what? This is not as terrible as I thought it was going to be.
So as I was cooking it, and I was tasting it, it was definitely transforming. And one of the big things that I noticed is that the fish broth, of course, had a very strong fish smell to it. And as I was cooking it, the smell just sort of went away. And then the cuttlefish ink had a really strong marine smell, is the only real way I can describe it.
I mean, fishy is one way, but...
Okay, yeah. But I already used that one. You gotta switch them up.
Sure.
And again, as I was cooking it, that just sort of melded away. And the white wine adds a little bit of acidity to the flavor, I think, which helps.
This is... Like I said, it's not as bad as I was thinking, because while this was cooking, it looked terrible. Black anything is not like the most appealing color for food. That said, it's not super flavorful either. Like, this reminds me of just like rice. Not even, like, barely flavored, kind of. Because I'm not getting a lot of flavor from it. It's mostly just, like, I don't know, like a grainy kind of rice.
Okay. And again, texture-wise, maybe on me, for sure.
Actually, the texture is not bad. Again, not as bad as I thought it was going to be. The squid in it, I can taste it. It's not a bad thing either. Before the squid was cooked, it was a terrible, in my opinion, texture. But
It was really interesting
it's
to prepare
it's
it.
fine. Like in these cube forms, like it's fine.
And I think the braising did an amazing job of softening it so that when you're biting into it here, it just kind of becomes part of the rice mixture.
It is giving more of an earthy thing. It's like it brings out the flavor of rice, which is weird. I mean, it's a risotto, so it's a rice dish. So that's not necessarily a bad thing.
And
I was just expecting more more flavors to pop, particularly the seafood aspect of it, which honestly I can't even really taste.
well, and in the the videos and the recipes that I had seen, trying to sort of figure out a process about making this and what is agreed upon in a bunch of different recipes, one thing that kept coming up that I sort of laughed at the time, or I guess was amused by because I didn't understand it, was they said that it was like taking a bite of the sea. And I get that now. And I was really worried about that because I was thinking fishy and salty. But this is
Right.
earthy, which is the weirdest way to describe something that is also very oceanic. Like this, I feel like if I was on the beach and I could hear it in the background, this would 100% fit in that exact environment.
Kind of.
Like, I don't think
actually,
about this as like a winter time, it's cold outside, warm you up. This is very mellow.
The aftertaste does actually remind me more of the ocean aspect of what you're getting at. So I get that. It is... Yeah. I don't have as much of a refined palate, I think. So it took a little longer for me to get there. But I am kind of getting a little bit more of the ocean in the aftertaste. Which is not bad. And I don't... Like, seafood isn't my typical go-to type of meal. Not that I don't like it. It's just... It's not my favorite. But... That hasn't really changed. But this is not bad.
Fair. I mean, I've had squid before, but absolutely never in this form.
Yeah.
I don't know for sure if I've had a risotto. But I feel if this were served to me, I wouldn't have any complaints. Now that I know what is being served to me.
I prefer my food more flavorful.
I wonder what a little bit of
Salt? Yeah.
extra salt will do.
Maybe that'll bring out some more extra. Yeah.
Oh, yes. Should have mixed it more before I took that bite.
Yeah. That is better.
Okay.
That is better. Still, though, I was expecting a bigger punch.
I mean, not all of the dishes that we're going to go through are necessarily going to be flavor bombs, because some of them are based off of just the ingredients that were available in the area.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, in this case, the tradition of this definitely comes from fishermen trying to utilize their catch as best they can, but I can also see how people would appreciate the flavor of this, because I have never had this particular flavor anywhere else. And though it's mellow and it's maybe not super strong, and maybe I made it wrong, because maybe it is supposed to be a great big punch of flavor, but for me it's just a very mellow flavor, but also very rich, and it's something that, like I said, I would really enjoy on a cool, refreshing afternoon, as opposed to, say, it's not a super hearty, warming meal for me in the wintertime. And I should really research when it was actually traditionally made before I potentially put my foot in my mouth, historically speaking, but look it up and we'll see if I have to addend anything.
Yeah. One thing that is notable that I think is that it will turn your lips and your teeth black if you were not careful. Yeah.
No way.
It's like the ink is, ink or something.
All right.
Yeah.
So, overall, I'm fine with it. I don't know.
It's definitely not my favorite thing that we've made.
I would agree. I'm very excited to have made it because I got to make the fish stock, which was really fun. I got to learn about how adding the risotto broth slowly into it and then just sort of letting it wait. How that transforms the rice over time, because it was a huge transformation. I think it almost doubled the size of the rice in the pot.
Just about, yeah.
I've definitely never worked with cuttlefish ink before. I don't know if I'll work with it again. I know you can use it in pastas, so...
It's very striking.
Yeah. But it also, it has flavor to it that is unique to it, but it's not a super strong, punchy flavor at all.
Which is, not what I was expecting, because it smelled pungent, in its raw form. So it feels like it cooks all that away.
Yeah.
Which is not a terrible thing, and it left a kind of like an earthy taste to it. In a subtle way, and not like this tastes like grass type of feel. So
I will definitely be finishing
dish.
this bowl for sure, which I don't know if I really, if I'm being honest, was expecting to going into it. I was going to try my hardest, but now it's not even really going to be a struggle. And I'll definitely be able to finish this off, because it did make a good amount of the dish for sure.
It did. Like you said, it doubled in size from the pan that we had it in. So
Yeah. And so, I guess our last stop in Italy is going to be next.
all right. Well, see you then.
See you next time. Thanks for coming.